Spoiler alert, major plot points from Gears of War 4 discussed in the following video. I'm sure many people rolled their eyes at the title of this video. How could a franchise based on brothers in arms, full of women in refrigerators and male tears, be feminist at all? Never mind the most feminist game of a given year. But I find myself seriously considering this possibility. Gears of War 4 is far from perfect from a feminist perspective, but perfect can be the enemy of the good, and there's a lot of good here. Gears of War 4 tried to do a lot, perhaps too much at once, but despite its clear flaws, there's a lot to like here. The biggest challenge to an effective feminist analysis of this game is that it isn't very well written. Tom Bissell tends to be highly focused on structure, but dialogue persistently eludes him, falling into cliché. And Gears of War 4 is full of clichés. But in fairness, not all of those cliches are because of the writer. There's a lot of going back to the well regarding the plot of the game, recycling devices from the original trilogy that don't work as well the second time around. Part of this is a well-meaning mistake a lot of male-dominant development teams make, the belief that creating an interesting female character can be accomplished by taking a man's story and changing the gender of the protagonist. The female gear, Kate, has been transposed onto the narrative arc that Dom had during the original 3 Gears games, only she's chasing her mom instead of a wife. Kate also falls into the trope trap that seems to be the trend for 2016. Daughters as dream girls. The rebooted Lara Croft and Jewel from ReCore are other examples of this trope, which comes across as male developers trying to define a character by proxy, because they understand what it's like to have a daughter, but they don't know what it's like to be a daughter. Sometimes these companies then hire a female writer once the building blocks of the narrative are set, but the structure becomes a straitjacket where the writer doesn't have the freedom to really make it work. It's almost refreshing that Gears 4 doesn't use a female writer as a shield. This is a story men are telling that includes women. Nothing wrong per se with that. It just happens too often in gaming. It would be better if women were more meaningfully involved in the creative process, but at least they tried. And that's going to be the theme going forward here. At least the Coalition is trying, and they have some notable successes. Kate Diaz is set up to be something of a love interest for Marcus Phoenix's son and game protagonist JD Phoenix. There's even a line that sticks a pin in that role later on in the game. While there's no moony eyes or anything like that, Kate's functional role is to show what caring, compassionate, manly men Marcus and JD are. She's too perfected to be successfully funny, terribly interesting, or well-defined. She's delicately beautiful in a way that's dissonant with her rough scavenger upbringing. She's verbally whitewashed in a way that's dissonant with her last name being notably Latina. In the first 3 games, Carlos Ferro made Dominic Santiago human and knowable by acting instead of voice acting. Dom wasn't an obvious Latino. TM. He was a person with moments of Latino flourish in his dialogue because it came naturally to the Latino actor who played him. Kate doesn't have that because she isn't voiced by an actress of Latino heritage. I brought this up in my review and someone asked why this matters. The answer to this is twofold. From a hiring perspective, no one wants an affirmative action situation where non-white actors are hired for roles that seem forced. That's why it's so important to hire non-white actors where it actually seems appropriate. And I can't believe there wasn't a single Latina voice actress out there who could do this job. BioWare and Ubisoft managed to find them. Furthermore, it isn't like Laura Bailey turned in especially great work in this game. Her jokes bomb from poor delivery. Granted, they were pretty awful jokes to begin with. Since Bailey is a very good voice actress, all signs point to a miscast and problems in voice direction. This isn't Bailey's fault, and it's the second major game role that a non-white woman was denied because Laura Bailey was hired instead. That being said, I think Bailey's performance as Nadine Ross in Uncharted 4 was much better than what she turned in as Kate. But that may be because Nadine was retroactively turned into an Oreo by Naughty Dog. From what I understand, the character was originally conceived as a white woman. Pivoting to artistic criticisms, it isn't just that Kate isn't white. This doesn't matter the same way in a world that isn't Earth. It's that Kate spent her life as an outsider, scavenging cog bases for batteries and discarded weapons. She isn't a warrior princess. She doesn't have a finishing school background. She came up rough. She's a cross between a ghetto girl and an indigenous person, as the outsider villages indicate in their design. There's nothing given to us by the game that explains why she has absolutely no vocal edge. Except her role as default girlfriend and likable daughter fantasy, which artistically force female characters into states of perfected femininity that rob them of unique character. Kate perpetuates the beauty myth that tells non-white women that in order to be perceived as beautiful, they need to perform and sound like a white girl. But that isn't my complaint here. My complaint is that she's a surprisingly boring character based on her background. This is an instance where the game developers did, in fact, give the writer a lot to work with, and the writer blew it. But this means Kate has a lot of untapped potential. The groundwork is there for her to be an exceptional character. She isn't going to think the same way as a girl raised within the framework of the coalition of ordered governments, with their sinister breeding programs that her mother didn't want her to be a part of. This difference makes her potentially interesting. But let's move on to talk about that mother, because Reina Diaz is an incredible character. In one scene, she completely steals the show. Reina feels like a Gears of War character. She's hard-edged, dynamic, and bombastic. She instantly makes a kinetic impact, and she kicks the crap out of monsters. Unfortunately, we won't get more Reina, because the Coalition fridged her to advance Kate and JD's story. Granted, advancing the plot of a female main character isn't the definition of women in refrigerator syndrome. But remember that Kate isn't the playable character in single-player campaign. JD is. Kate matters because she's girlfriend material, so we have a case of women in refrigerator by proxy. Whether Reina's death serves a larger purpose remains to be seen. After all, characters like Duncan in Dragon Age Origins were killed off despite being good characters, but something seems indecisive in the way they handled Reina's death. Marcus, connected to the Swarm network after being captured by a Snatcher, found out Reina was still alive and not being treated like the others. The game never quite explains why he didn't also tell Kate that he knew that she couldn't be saved. She could only be freed from torture through death. I would have been more interested in a story about Kate having to fight through swarms to kill her mother to save her, instead of an ultimately futile rescue plot. That would have been a lot more interesting and, more significantly, a unique story arc, not a retread of Dom's futile search for his wife. However, Gears of War has a tradition of killing characters. Lieutenant Kim in the very first game is the most notable example. Of course, there's also multiple members of the Carmine family. The first prominent woman to die in a Gears game was Dom's wife Maria, and it was a very big deal. The kidnapping of Sophia Hendricks was handled less well. Judgment is the narrative low watermark in the Gears franchise, but it's because the kidnapping and possible rape and murder of that character was poorly handled, not because a woman was harmed. Putting women in the line of fire in Gears games is actually a major point in the pro-feminist status of that franchise. The planet Sarah is a place with a very high death toll, as the opening scenes of Gears 4 remind us. The military reality regarding women borrows from the points in Earth's history where women were called up to the front lines because too many men got killed. So, women serve. And that means women are going to get injured and killed. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to fail. And I give the Gears franchise credit for confronting those realities, even if they haven't quite figured out how to do that to maximum impact. I personally think that killing Reina Diaz was a mistake from a creative and business perspective. She was a big, bold character in a franchise refresh that could have used a few more of those. But the fact that they were able to create that character at all tells me that they have the potential to do it again, and I hope they do. If they stop thinking about women in relational terms, of women as wives, mothers, and daughters, and start thinking about women as individuals, then they could do great things, because they're already doing good things. At this point, I think I should explain where I get this idea that women are conceived relationally in Gears of War 4. Well, because the Coalition also fridged Anya Stroud. Anya's death so far has only served to advance Marcus and JD's story, and it was badly handled. No positive here. It was bad. There was a way that Anya's death could have been handled and been poignant, using the widespread fan opinion that Anya was unable to have children. I'm framing it this way because I can't actually find firm evidence of this in any of the comics or books. It might be there, I just missed it. Anyway, the COG breeding program could have been used to depict Anya as continuing to be a good soldier, subjected to dangerous fertility treatments to do her duty and reproduce. It could have been, and still could be, a powerful story about what it means to be a female soldier on Sarah, risking her life in a unique way to what the guys have to do. Motherhood as duty is a squicky, uncomfortable topic, but oh man, there's so much potential to explore this here. All they say in Gears 4 is that Anya died when JD was younger, but they don't say how. Perhaps the fertility treatments gave her cancer, perhaps an autoimmune disease. Either way, Anya could go down as a soldier, not just a woman in refrigerator. It should be framed as the end of her own story as a woman who secretly loved a man for years against regulations and used that love to do her duty at the sacrifice of her own life. If she had to die as a disposable baby maker, she chose to do it from a place of love for Marcus. That'd be a hell of a story. Instead, Anya's death is presented as a pretense for why Marcus is a loner living in a shack on Anya's family estate. It's a setup for a level design, and that's a huge missed opportunity. Okay, now that I've beaten the piss out of this game, and I have to in order to make my case. This isn't a popular opinion here. Here's why I think that Gears 4 is actually pretty feminist. If you get past the tropes, the bad narrative construction, and the clueless writing, the game functions as a game with a profound lack of benevolent sexism. The game doesn't treat women as needing to be protected by men. It doesn't make the death of a mother seem somehow more profound than, say, Dom's death in Gears 3. Women are, for the most part, treated like equals, and the flaws in the amateurish narrative design make that lack of benevolent sexism seem all the more earnest. The Coalition is still working out how to make a female gear into a character instead of a diversity indication, but it's trying. It struggles to recapture the emotional depth and the comedy of the original trilogy, but it's trying. The DNA of this franchise is inherently inclusive, and that means it can improve in meaningful ways without changing too much. This is why I've been so hard on Gears 4, because I see so much damned potential in these new Gears chapters. If they make Kate more of a character, not a placeholder that follows a plot, but an actual character with likes and dislikes, strengths and flaws, and they find a way to replace the powerful older female presence her mother Reyna brought to the table, then Gears 5 could have a lot going for it. The potential is very much there, and it's a potential a lot of AAA games just don't have. Sure, there are a lot of games still to come this year, and Dishonored 2 and Watch Dogs 2 show real potential to give feminists something to cheer about. But right now, Gears 4 is the standard bearer for most feminist game of the year, followed by Doom. And those games share another feminist point in common: a non-sexualized female villain in a game with male protagonists. In Gears 4, Jin is a complex, challenging character. And those complexities of character why I'm not including Overwatch in the most feminist list. Sure, Overwatch has a lot of character diversity. It's great in terms of body type representation, but it's candy. It doesn't attempt to challenge or engage in real issues, unless you count Tracer's butt crack. This is no slight on the game, and something can be feminist and still fun. I just want to stress that feminism isn't just about what characters look like. It's about what they do in their roles within the game. And Overwatch doesn't go too deep in that way. It's just not that kind of game. Again, that's not criticism. There's just a lot less to analyze. I want to reward Gears of War for trying to tackle difficult things instead of staying in the realm of bubblegum. And to address the grumblers that complain that it shouldn't matter if a game is feminist or not, yes it does! And not just for women. Male players are becoming increasingly concerned about the depictions of women in video games, both because they've seen the impact of toxic cultural elements on the women in their families and friends circles, but also because interesting characters of all genders make for interesting games, and female characters just don't tend to be that interesting in the current paradigm. And this is where anti-feminists start yowling, but that's just noise. There's no feminist conspiracy in men being concerned about the fact that women spend an inordinate amount of time worrying about living up to a standard of impossible perfection while still struggling with how to show respect and love for women in a highly charged environment. I think the developers at the Coalition number among those men, and I think they're making meaningful attempts to include women in challenging stories. They've got a lot of room for improvement, but these are the sorts of attempts that feminist analysts like myself want to see. We don't expect perfection right away, so I hope that the Coalition, if they see these criticisms, see them as confidence in continued growth, not an indication that they should stop trying. Sure, as I said, there are flaws, but there's a lot of good stuff here and a ton of potential, and I greatly appreciate that they took risks with their female characters instead of constant pandering. The profound lack of benevolent sexism in Gears of War 4 is an excellent start to this next trilogy, we assume, of Gears of War.